Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with Mr. Mike Robinson. He has a new book out called Walking the Dusk, and he has an author who's written many other books. Mr. Robinson, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. So you just recently had a new book come out, right? Walking the Dusk. Do you want to tell people who are watching just a little bit about the book?
Sure. So it's been something of a journey, both the writing of it and not to mention the story within the covers.
Hmm.
But it's something of a contemporary divine comedy. Um, if you imagine, say, a Carl Sagan style figure as the Virgil leading the main character, who's a physicist in his adult life. We see two different threads in his life. We see his adult life and his child life. Um, and it's essentially a physicist being led through the underworld um,
Hmm.
in order to save the essence of his sister. And so there's a tension there between um, not only spirituality and mythology, but certainly like a modern day academic approach uh, to the world and rationality and clashing with irrationality and belief systems and everything else. So there's a lot going on, and it's also just it's a dark fantasy horror. It's
Hmm.
not delves into esoteric topics, but I try to make it accessible to those who like to be entertained as well as stimulated, who like to think along with their as they on their beach reads.
Hmm.
You know.
So can you tell people a little bit about yourself and why you started to get into writing?
So I started writing when I was about six. It's kind of a crass thing, but I always say that it was my brain's way of going to the bathroom. It just I had to
Hmm.
like regurgitate what I was either being read to by my mother when I was much younger, or what I was reading. I wanted to tell my own stories. I love to draw. I don't know, the impulse to create has always been there. And then I started professionally selling short stories when I was about 19 and tried to write a novel a year thereafter. And sold my first novel when I was about 27
Hmm.
to a small press, and have just been more or less consistently uh, selling or publishing since then. It's, of course, a Richter scale of, you know, economic success. Every once in a while, you get good sales, and then they plateau, or so it's been a quite a wild ride in this modern landscape of publishing. But yeah, the you have to do it
Hmm.
essentially, and there are stories that I write just because I need to get them out of my system. They don't necessarily have a place in the market that I can see, although I sometimes try to get them published. But yeah, it really just has to be a natural function, and then I worry about whether or not where to place it.
So what was your first book that you like book, not short story, that you
Oh, sure.
would publish?
That I published. It was called Skunk Ape Semester, and I guess the quick pitch would be On the Road meets by Jack Kerouac meets the X Files.
Hmm.
So it's about a professor with a closet interest in Sasquatch because of a childhood encounter with the creature, and so then because of a health scare, he goes on sabbatical, and along with three graduate students, uh, travels the United States, using a contact list of a fellow paranormal researcher, and he investigates and interrogates, and they have their own little adventures. And it's really more about the human reaction to the monster than the monster itself. "Quote unquote"
Hmm.
monster, I put in quotation marks. So it's a little bit more of a, dare I say, literary or sober-minded approach to paranormal phenomenon and Bigfoot and things like that. And it's not Jaws with claws, the kind that we see in a lot of that genre.
Hmm.
Um, and it's so yeah, I actually re-released it in, I think it was 2021, because I got the rights back from the initial publisher,
Hmm.
and so it's got a new coat of paint, so to speak. So
Um, What was like the writing process for that first book, and was the whole process of getting it published, was it like different from how you imagined, or was it tough?
Yeah, I mean, they've always been somewhat tough. So that book, in addition to just kind of being a natural outgrowth of my interest in strange phenomena, um, it was loosely based on the travels that I have done myself around the United States and talking to people who've encountered either strange things or going to places with strange repute, um, or places of strange repute rather. And so I coupled together some other travels, but I did a big one in 2008 where I went all around the country and visited some of these locales, and so that was a lot of fun, and that kind of gave me the motivation to start the book and start to really compile not only my personal experiences on that trip, but just all my armchair interest in the subject and various subjects that the book treats.
Hmm.
Um, and then I wrote the book and tried to get it into. This was before I had an agent actually, so I tried to get it into agents' hands. I took it to conferences and um, submitted it, and I of course was hoping for maybe a big advance, bigger publisher, but I went with a smaller press who was a little bit more intimate and was sorry, that was my cat.
That's
Um,
fine.
uh, and I was somewhat inexperienced on the novel publishing front, so I published a few short stories, and so I didn't really know. I didn't have much frame of reference in terms of what to expect and how it would go. So I was just happy that it had got accepted somewhere, and so I was like, yeah, let's roll with it. So yeah, I went with it, and some ups and downs. I mean, small presses don't have the reach that big presses do, and I had to do a lot
Yeah.
of the marketing myself, and blah blah blah. Um, but they did help in some ways, and it gave me something to sell at cons, and it gave me something of a platform, and it had something of a targeted demographic, and I knew who to reach out to, so it wasn't that bad. And then other doors opened, and other books fell into line, which is nice. So
So you've also written a trilogy, right? Is it the
I
Enigma
have.
of Twilight
Yeah,
Falls?
yeah, so I call it a non-linear trilogy. So it's
Hmm.
um, you can read there's an ideal order, but you can read the third one as a standalone book, or you could read the second one as a standalone book and not read the other two, or you could read them in any order and they kind of fill in each other's cracks because they all treat different times, different characters, but the thing that connects them is the town of Twilight Falls and the strange mystery that they're all backgrounded against, um, or that backgrounds them. So yeah, uh, that actually didn't wasn't planned. It just kind of fell into place. Like I wrote the first book, and then I wrote the second book, and I realized they could be connected. And then, um, as those two, as I was fleshing out the connection between those two books, a third book germinated, and then I realized that I could um, consciously make these standalone books as well as connected books.
Hmm.
So
That's
yeah,
not something that's like easy to do. That's pretty rare that you'll see that there's a series of books in which each book can be read as a standalone, but
right, right, exactly.
while also like when I was younger, I used to read these they're these John Grisham books, and it was like about this kid lawyer or something, and like there was like six of them, and very they were all very unique stories, but at the same time, like if somebody just picked up a random one, I knew that they'd just be able to read it. And I thought like at the mind, I thought that was at the time I was like, I thought that was really unique.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah.
And I still don't see it very often. Like I still don't see it that I mean most series are you have to read them in that order.
Right.
So I think that that's like a really unique idea and a really
Yeah, thank you.
good thing
Thank
that
you.
authors
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
making it by
Yeah,
itself.
I was glad for it. I'm glad it sort of fell into place as it did. Um and they're all more or less dark fantasy, dark contemporary fantasy, so um you know, horror and kind of occultish stuff with a thread of philosophy and more character oriented stories. So um, yeah, they I think they play off each other pretty well.
What is so now you have Walking the Dusk, right? Can you describe a little bit about that book's again the process and what you really were like trying to maybe accomplish with this book?
Sure. Yeah. So the very early seeds of the book um, were very Faust-like. So it was the very first idea was that a physicist was approached by essentially a demon character
Hmm.
and offered all the secrets of the universe if the demon could possess the physicist. And it's a obviously a give and take kind of thing. Like the more that the demon would possess the physicist, the more his soul is compromised, but the more he knows. Um, and so I, when my agent was asking me about new projects at the time, I think it was like 2015, 2014, I sent her that idea and I had written kind of a prologue um, where he encounters that same demonic force as a child.
Hmm.
Um, and that gave her the idea to actually bulk out the child story and thread it through the rest of the narrative. I hadn't planned to do that. I thought it was just going to be a prologue, and then 90% of the book or 95% of the book was going to be about his adult life and his tension with this supernatural force. But I really liked that idea, and it was also more commercial. My initial idea, I still like it, but it's a little bit more niche,
Hmm.
and um, and of course she's in the business of trying to sell books, so um, I made it a little bit more accessible on that front, and wrote the first draft within maybe 8 months, and obviously needed a lot of work, a lot of finessing on the going back and forth in between the timelines and on structuring the book properly.
Hmm.
And so then I also I also wrote an alternate YA version of the book, which is mostly him as a child,
Hmm.
just in case we couldn't sell the one with the adult thread. And that wound up not going anywhere, and I'm kind of thankful for that because I didn't really like the. It's not that I didn't like it; it's just it's not the version of the book I really would
Yeah.
want to have sent out in the world. Um, so we tried. Um, we made the rounds. A lot of kind of thank you, no thank yous. This looks great, but I couldn't quite convince the marketing team, or close calls, or an editor who really liked it, but then um, left her job like a week later. Any number of weird
Hmm.
variables that happen in the publishing industry. Um, and then eventually, I got it with Journal Stone Publishing, which is a mid-tier press that puts out a lot of horror and dark fantasy. They put out Bentley Little and Laird Barron and those guys. And so yeah, and I think that was a good home for it. I think they got the book, and yeah, it came out just this May. I sold it maybe about a year ago, um,
Hmm.
officially. And so yeah, it was good to have it see the light of day because it was bugging me that it was just kind of a draft sitting on my or manuscript sitting on my desk.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So you said 2015, right, is when you kind of
yeah.
got the idea. So have you been like working on it since then?
Off and on. So there was a huge push throughout 2015, 2016, where it took up most of my focus. And then 2017 is when my agent really started to shop it around. And then um, it was more or less just kind of sitting on my hard drive or my digital desk uh, until like 2021, I believe. And then that's when we officially stopped making the rounds to the big five or big four. Um, and I maybe returned to it and cleaned up some things that I had wanted to clean up, or didn't realize I wanted to clean up until recently, because every year you ideally get better and you see things that you want to fix or tweak. Um,
Hmm.
and so then I didn't really get back into it in earnest until early 2022, and so I sold it in July 2022.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, there was maybe like 2.5 years of hard work on it, and then subsequent years kind of peppered throughout, um, slight updates, tweaks, things like that. Yeah.
What's is there something that you feel most proud of in this book? Maybe whether it's like certain the way like a certain scene was written or just like something to do with the book as a whole.
Um, that's a good question. I'm proud of the way that it braids different genres together in a way that I think is coherent and sound. So you you have elements of horror, you have elements of fantasy, you have elements of spirituality, um, you have literary elements, obviously, um, and it's one of the it's one of the few books. I mean, I don't know of another book actually. Maybe you can correct me, but um, it in a sort of American Horror Story style sense, it combines genre elements that we've not necessarily seen combined before. So, for instance, it touches on both extraterrestrials and the afterlife,
Hmm.
or both, you know, spirits or ghosts, as well as fey creatures, or what we would call, fey creatures, fairy creatures. So, um, it it tries to it's ambitious in its reach. I mean, the individual reader would tell me how successful I was in combining all those things, but I think there is a consistent and coherent through line that upon which those elements are soundly hung.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So out of all the books that you have written, right, I'm gonna take a step back on all of your books as a total. Is there ever been a certain book which has just given you like the most trouble to write, or like a book that you just considered maybe stopping midway through because you maybe got writer's block or something like that?
Hmm. Uh, yeah, that's a very good question.
When you're saying no, is not
Thankfully,
a bad thing. I mean, that just means that.
yeah. I mean, thankfully, I think that the I've not really gotten terrible writer's block on the books that have seen the light of day. I think that's one reason why they've seen the light of day, probably. Um, there's been no. I think probably the aforementioned YA version of Walking the Dusk was probably the most difficult, the most uphill grind for me.
Hmm.
Even though that wasn't technically released, but it was an aspect of a book that was released. Um, but Yeah, I think so. I did have a book come out called The Atheist,
Hmm.
about a celebrity kind of atheist pundit who has a near-death experience. Um, and that one is a little bit more kind of in the introspective kind of Dostoevsky realm. And that one, when I was working with my editor on that one, the amount of opinions that story inspired, like in terms of like how to go about things, what aspects of psychology we reveal at certain points in the book, and why, and it created a lot of back and forth, and for better or for worse, and the editing process for that book was pretty rigorous and just kind of dispiriting at some point, because I would send him a draft like, okay, this is better, and then you'd come back and it'd just be like comment after comment after comment
Uh-huh.
after, like, oh God, really? Like,
Started
so that
good.
yeah, that was difficult, but in the end, I think it did make the book better. Oh,
So if somebody like, right, if they check out your website, right, you have more than just books under there. You have uh editing, you have movies. You talk a little bit about the movie thing. I saw that there were a couple short films or like
sure.
smaller films in there.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, even though I was born and raised in LA and I've loved movies my whole life, I didn't really get serious about screenwriting until maybe 2012, 2013, 2013. Um, and that was because I just happened to come in contact with uh, friends of mine now who are either producers or screenwriters themselves, and we would collaborate. And obviously writing prose, writing books, working in the options realm, or the attempts to get options and adaptations going, I come into contact. It brings me into contact with more movie folk or TV folk, and so I've written 9 screenplays, feature-length screenplays, a few shorts, and one feature was produced, which is that's the one that one of the ones I talk about on the website.
Mhm.
It's called Corral, currently called Blood Corral. They were changing the name back. Um, it was shot, it was produced, it was shot, and it was edited. There's some legal snafus that are going on. Unfortunately, I don't want to get too into the weeds on that, but
Mhm.
it's delaying the rest of its development or the rest of its post production, and so it's in somewhat of an unfortunate limbo at the moment.
Mhm.
I've actually thought about novelizing it because that way I could, my special effects budget is unlimited.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, the short film I wrote with an ex girlfriend, and that's been making it's a short science fiction piece, about 15 minutes, and that's been making the festival rounds and getting decent buzz, and so that's been nice to see. Um, Otherwise, I've collaborated with a good friend of mine on a few features that we've tried to pitch to the likes of, say, Sony or elsewhere,
Mhm.
and it's not taking up most of my bandwidth. It's kind of a, I don't want to call it a side hustle, but
Yeah.
it's a way to kind of round out my writer portfolio, but it's not my main focus as a writer. My main love is books and prose. So yeah.
Have you ever considered trying, or maybe you were saying that you've pitched stuff, any of your books that you have written, maybe as like a TV show or a movie?
I've adapted my novel The Prince of Earth into a feature screenplay, and that got a couple of finalist nods and things like that in various contests, but I've not formally pitched it anywhere. It
Mhm.
was more kind of an interesting exercise to process that into cinematic form, and as much as I just said, the prose is where my heart is. It is interesting to see. I would recommend novelists write screenplays, and screenplays or screenwriters write novels too, because they
Mhm.
definitely play well off each other. They can influence each other in good ways. I think novel writing can teach you about voice and character, and I think screenplay writing can teach you about economy of words and
Mhm.
getting the crispness of the language down.
I mean, right now there's a shortage too of writers
Sure.
for
Right.
for the
Yeah.
movies.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
I mean, if they want to come pick me up, I'll write for Marvel any day. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I'm
There you go.
I'm not part of the guild, so
Sure.
I'll do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But what would you say is like maybe an aspect of being an author that people don't realize, or something that's just like it's one of the tougher parts of being an author? How it's, as that being your profession.
Right. You don't expect to make a lot of money. Especially at the beginning. I mean, I still wouldn't consider myself to be making a lot of money because I, for any number of reasons, like I genre hop. I don't have. I mean, I think the people that tend to be consistent sellers are those sort of like Michael Connolly. They have the same character and they have the same series. Um, I tend not to do that. And one book might be different subject wise and stylistically from my last book. And so
Mhm.
the readers that love my one book over here might not follow me to this book over here. So I might be a unique case, but um, I'll just requote David Morrell, who wrote First Blood, which became Rambo. I mean, he was talking in his book, Lifetime Lessons from a Lifetime of Writing, um, that in his creative writing class, I forget where he teaches, but he always asks on the first day, why do you want to be a writer? And he gets a number of answers, and a lot of them kind of circle the whole like, oh well, it would be nice to be creative for a living, or it would be nice to make the kind of money that Stephen King makes. And then,
Mhm.
but those are all the wrong answers. The answer he's looking for is because you have no choice and because it's in you to write. And that
Mhm.
really has to be the thing. You can't go in it for the paychecks. If you do, you're going to be disappointed. Advances are shrinking. The publishing marketplace is all over the place.
I'm sure with
It's
self-publishing is becoming bigger and bigger, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah, and it's a weird paradox because the more opportunities there are out there, sometimes it feels like the fewer opportunities there are out there. I mean, the it's so saturated and so crowded, especially now with the advent of AI. I don't know where that's going. Um,
Mhm. Have a
that
writing story for you.
yeah. I mean, just to give you one example, I was reading. I forget what magazine it was, but there was an editor who was saying, it used to be that we got um, maybe 400 submissions a month. Now we get like 4,000. I'm sure it's a lot more than that now.
Hmm.
And so it's just there are more people doing it, more people able to do it, and there's just a lot of noise. And so um, it can be difficult. I mean, agents used to send formal rejections. Now they don't have the bandwidth to do that. They just say if you haven't heard from us in 3 months, consider yourself rejected.
Hmm.
So it's just um, it's a lot of things eating at people's attention, and it's a lot of things kind of thinning the profit margins. And but at the same time, there's more opportunity to actually get your work out there than ever. It's just whether or not it's someone will see it
Hmm.
and you'll get a wide following. That's the big question. But if your goal is to have a book out there, that's easier than ever. But if your goal is to be a big name author and on NPR and be on the bestseller list and have a place in the culture, well, it's I would argue it's harder than ever now to do that, but certainly still possible.
And especially with like the internet too, it's like and everybody can like read something online. They're like, oh, I could write better than this. Like anybody could think, oh, I'm an author. I can write better than this one small thing that I saw. And
Right.
it's like getting their books out there, like it's easier than ever. You can pay like the self-publish or like you can go the self-publishing route and you can just get it done fast. And then like you don't
Yeah.
realize that like you like putting a book out, if you put a book out there and expect sales to just come to you, it's pretty rare.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Sales just
I
walk to you. You have to have a good team, you have to have marketing, you have to understand
yeah.
what the market wants, and you have to just like understand that if your if your book doesn't have like the quality that it should
Yeah.
have, it probably won't sell.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I think that's the other misconception that I kind of touched on, but I want to clarify. Um, the days of being kind of a Thomas Pynchon, where you write the book and then you sit back and you can afford to be a recluse and just let the publisher handle everything,
Hmm.
long gone. Like even if you get published with a big New York publisher, most of the promotional effort is going to fall on your shoulders.
Hmm.
It's just the case.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, you can pull out like any book. Like if you go to like any random, just like for example, if I was at the library, I could pull out any book and like half these books will be published by like Scholastic, Penguin House, all these like big names. I've still never heard of like majority of these books.
yeah, exactly.
Like
I
I
know.
feel like the publisher doesn't guarantee you any success.
Right.
It
Correct.
only just gives you like a little starting mark where you can maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to go up
No,
from.
that's very true. And sort of to a point you touched on just a couple of minutes ago, writing is an art that uh, is underestimated in terms of its barrier to entry. So,
Mhm.
because again, sort of like you said, everyone learned to read and write when they were kids, and the best writers more or less make good writing look easy. And so when someone reads a book and they're like, "Oh, well, this looks easy enough, and I can read and write," like they could sit down and they know as they write what they mean. They could see the story being downloaded into their heads, and they think that they're, maybe. And I'm talking about inexperienced writers, um, that they're doing it justice as they're writing it, not realizing all the finer points of growth and improvement and evolution that you might have to go through as an artist, as any artist would have to. I mean, if you wanted to be a painter or a guitarist, no one underestimates that. It's like, well, clearly you're not a good guitarist if you just sit down and play for the first time. You have to learn.
Yeah.
But people feel like they don't. have to learn writing because they've already learned in second grade, and
Mhm.
but they don't really there's this illusion of having all the tools necessary when it's really just as steep a learning curve, in my opinion. You
Mhm.
know, people I think underread too, or writers tend to underread. I know a lot of writers who I respect too, but they did just read in their genre, and I think that that's counterproductive. I think I would I would recommend that people read across the board, or writers read across the board. Um, Read outside your comfort zone. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes that sometimes you might stumble upon a stylistic technique that you never would have thought of for your own books, you know, and you're like, oh, well, I could, that's kind of cool. I could use that, and that's how new voices are shaped and molded, is by combining elements that previously were not combined.
Yeah, a lot of people just throw it into Grammarly. Oh, sweet. I'll just
Right?
take
Yeah.
those red marks,
Exactly.
get that out. Okay, we're
Yeah.
good to go.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the only people that could honestly like sell a book without any true writing skill is a famous person who's
Mhm.
writing about their own experiences. Other
Right.
than
Yeah.
that,
Or
you have
having a
to
ghostwriter. Yeah.
yeah, you have
Yeah.
to understand how to write. Otherwise, your book is it's just not going to be an easy read.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Or it's not going to be clear. I mean, I'm also an editor, and I've seen many a story where the I read something like a chapter or a short story or something, and I'm like, what is going on?
Hmm.
And I kind of clarify as much as I can my issues, and the author realizes that they forgot to clarify something very elementary about the story that they knew, but
Hmm.
they just forgot to clarify or translate from their head onto the page.
Yeah.
And so it can be there's a little bit of the egocentrism there, where it's like, oh well, because I see it, everyone else should see it,
Hmm.
but that's not the case. You have to absolutely make sure that everyone else sees what you see.
Yeah, I think it's like what you said, like good writers make good writing look easy.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
why I mean anybody is like, oh, okay, if I just get my words down on this page, like they'll try to maybe take a little couple stylistic elements from how the some authors that they enjoy to read write it, but they don't understand like it doesn't read the same way at all.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I just have two more questions left.
Sure.
One, do you have out of all the books you've written a favorite book?
um
Or if somebody
I
were to come up to you and you're like, oh, I'm an author, they're like, oh, which book of yours I should read? What would be the first one that
yeah.
you tell them
um
to read?
yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of having uh a shelf of multiple genres in which I've written. So if if someone comes up to me that is not a big horror fan or not a big speculative fiction fan, and say, "Oh, what of yours might I like best?" I would probably give them a non supernatural detective murder mystery that I co-wrote with someone called "Dishonor Thy Father,"
Hmm.
and that's kind of a straightforward Dennis Lehane, Michael Connelly detective crime thriller.
Hmm.
Um, it's not my personal favorite of what I've written, but it would be more in that reader's wheelhouse. Um, if you're just in a vacuum asking what my favorite book is, what I would probably answer with what book I feel came out the closest to what I saw it as in my head, and that would be The Prince of Earth, which is a
Hmm.
psychological horror set in alternately in Scotland and in Los Angeles. Um, and it's got gothic elements, Lovecraftian elements. It's contemporary and it's period and it's uh, set against uh, historical circumstances
Hmm.
that we're still kind of living with, the Great Recession and things like that. Um, and so that would be my personal pick, but I'm the first to admit that that's not everyone's cup of tea, and so um, I usually say that my short story collection is a nice sampler platter. So
Hmm.
that one is too much dark matter, too little gray.
Hmm.
And if you like Twilight Zone stuff, if you like old school kind of Harlan Ellison, Love, Death and Robots, Black Mirror, throw
Yeah.
all that into a blender, and that's what that is. Yeah.
And then very last question. I ask this to every single author who comes on. Sorry. What advice would you give to someone who is an aspiring author or like wants to become an author but isn't really sure how to take that first leap into it?
I would just jump into writing. Make sure to write consistently, and if you can, every day. Um, 500 words, 1,000 words, whatever you can manage. Um, Make sure to read omnivorously, as I mentioned earlier. Read outside your comfort zone. Meet people too. Get honest feedback as much as you can.
Hmm.
But also know, this is also a skill that you develop. I mean, also know that which don't listen to every bit of feedback, whether positive or negative. I mean, if two people are giving you diametrically opposed bits of feedback, you go with the one that feels right for you. Or if one person out of eight gives you one negative bit and no one else noticed it or no one else had a problem with it, well, that might not be as big a deal.
Hmm.
But don't have it's that balance of ego and humility. The ego keeps you going. The ego keeps you motivated. But you also have to have the humility to know when something needs to be edited, or when something is not landing, or when you can improve something. So, um, self oversight and self reflection and self awareness is really key in a writer's toolbox too. I mean, we have this idea that, oh, we're just getting this stuff from the ether, and it's if you question it, how dare you question it? This is my baby. This is my vision. Well, there's many different ways to go out your vision, and other people's perspectives might help round out your vision and do justice to it more so than you ever could have thought.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's maintaining again not only ego and humility, but necessary isolation to write and to be productive, and networking in order to develop your craft and grow your resources and your contacts, which will help you later on, hopefully, in finding an agent or getting indie published or promoting yourself, or however, whatever path you want to take.
Awesome. Well, there you guys have it. That is, again, every author that I have always gives amazing advice on how to become an author. That was also another amazing piece of advice. Thank you, Mr. Robinson, so much for coming on.
Of
I had
course.
a
Thank you,
great
Rick.
time
Yeah.
asking you about all that stuff, all the books, all the whole wide genre. I mean, you're not just an author, you've done a lot of other stuff. So it was really
Oh,
fun
thank you.
talking to you about that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. And everybody watching, thank you. And I'll see you guys in the next video.